Welcome everybody to the June 20th, 2024 meeting of the Seattle Design Commission from 1 until 3:30, maybe a little bit less, depending on how we can think. We have our initial presentation and concept review of proposal, a joint proposal for redevelopment of the Memorial Stadium with the Design Commission's focus on the public realm and public spaces associated with that on the perimeter of the stadium. Why don't we go ahead and start with introductions? Commissioners, we don't, sure. All commissioners are attending in person today. We don't have any commissioners attending online. We do have members of the public, it appears, that might be attending. As part of what we normally do after the presentation, when we call for agency comment or public comment, we try to make sure that there are people attending online, and we have an opportunity for them to provide up to 2 minutes of public comment. We'll go ahead and start with introductions of commissioners, and then David, maybe we'll have you lead introductions of the team. And commissioners, go ahead and introduce yourself, your role on the commission, and if there are any disclosures. Well,
I can start. Good afternoon. Brian Markham, Engineer Commission.
Hello, Adam Amrine, Urban Planning Commissioner.
Hi, Kate Clark, Art Commissioner.
Hi, Molly Spitalnik, Urban Design Commissioner.
Jill Crary, at Large Commissioner and Chair, and I will disclose that I used to work at Seattle Center.
Katie Builder, Landscape Architect Commissioner.
Kevin O'Neill, Transportation Planning Commissioner and Vice Chair.
Ben Gist, Architect Commissioner.
David Kutzelman, full disclosure, I now work at Seattle Center. And happy to be here with the team and Lance Lopes, who's representing the One Roof Stadium Partnership. Brad Tong, consultant working on behalf of the school district. Barb Swift, who needs no introduction, Swift and Company. And Jackie Kern, who's also my partner on this project, representing the city at Seattle Center. And we have additional team members that will be introduced later online as part of that presentation.
we have, as you know, at 8 o'clock last night, we were working out the video. Will you be starting with the video?
Yes, we will.
I think you can go ahead just and share the video that you have as part of the team, and we'll see how it works.
Okay, so just to set the stage briefly, we've prepared a video that explains the Memorial Stadium project, and the basis for this was really to serve as a fundraising opportunity for us, because as you'll hear, there's a substantial amount of private contribution in this project, and we wanted to create something that would allow us to command a room and share with people the vision without someone standing up and trying to explain it. So that's really what this is.
Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Oh my God, look at that.
Look at that
Wow.
technology.
Okay. There you go. You know, I don't think I'm the person sharing this.
Wait a minute. Hold off, guys. We have no volume.
So when you share your screen, there's a share sound as well.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Wow.
So if you unshare
Oh,
and select this share sound, that
And if this doesn't work for you, Tom, I'm tracking you to do it. But go ahead, do the share sound.
It's just telling me share system sound is off and it won't let me turn it on.
so unshare your screen, and then when you click to reshare your screen, you can turn it on.
I got instructed on this 2 hours
Take
ago.
two.
It's the full service shop.
Yeah, impressive.
Give me an option. Try again. Pictures. Try something else here. Bear with me.
Wouldn't be a meeting without.
Okay, I think it's on now.
In 1947, Seattle welcomed Memorial Stadium, a tribute to the 762 high school students who sacrificed everything in World War II. This hallowed ground became more than just a stadium. It became a home for every high school student in our city. 74 years later, the torch of Memorial Stadium, though still standing, flickers with a dimming light. But today, a powerful opportunity lies before us, a chance to reignite the flame, preserve the gift of our forebears, and reimagine 1/7 of Seattle Center's campus. We can do this through a once-in-a-lifetime partnership between Seattle Public Schools and Seattle Center. The new Memorial Stadium will embody the essence of our community, a 6,500-seat beacon of unity, operated as a nonprofit for the benefit of young people across our region. It will be a haven where students can play the sports they love on the field where legends are born, where generations of musicians can hone their skills, and students with a bright future in technology and sports can be trained in the skills of tomorrow. It will be open to Seattle Center as it undergoes a remarkable renaissance, enhancing one of our city's greatest assets with community use and events. It can be a home for Sunday rec leagues and professional teams like Ballard FC and the Seawolves. Today, we stand at the crossroads of history with an opportunity to honor a dream set in motion over 70 years ago through the next generation of philanthropy and unwavering determination. Our 47,000 Seattle Public School students deserve not just a stadium, but a beacon of hope and inspiration, a world-class venue that stands as a testament to bravery and echoes with the cheers of dreams fulfilled. In collaboration with the Seattle Kraken and One Roof Foundation.
So that really sort of sums up why we're here. But I just want to provide a little bit more color from the standpoint of, and before I ultimately bring David and Brad back to the table to share their perspectives for their various enterprises. One Roof Foundation and why we're here. Many people might be asking that because, of course, I work for a hockey team. However, you know, we thought long and hard about this between the Kraken, Climate Pledge Arena, and our One Roof Foundation. We really asked ourselves, if not us, then who? We decided that it was something that we thought we were uniquely positioned to potentially broker a relationship on that campus, and more importantly, spearhead a fundraising effort to generate the needed fees that would allow us to actually build something that would fulfill the promise that we're talking about here. So what that's really looked like for us is so not only have we contributed $5 million towards the project, but we've raised an additional $17 million in private donations to date. Right now, so we're about $21.7 million in private donations. In addition, the state of Washington has contributed $4 million. The city of Seattle has contributed $40 million. And Seattle Public Schools has contributed $66.5 million in the form of a levy that was passed a few years ago. So we're at almost $130 million in committed fundraising. That is enough money, in our opinion, to be able to build this project. So what we've stepped in to do is serve as a developer. So we're going to go at risk. We're going to promise our partners that we're going to build this stadium for them. They're going to get what we promised, and we're going to be in charge of construction, backstopping the cost and the expense, so that ultimately the city and Seattle Public Schools are going to spend exactly what they've contributed to date and no more. And we will take on all of the responsibility for that beyond it. So when we say we're stepping in, is this the other piece of this I would really like to emphasize is that we're doing this with no developer profit. Be very, very clear here. Anything that this facility generates in terms of revenue will be put right back into the project and back into Seattle Public Schools funding to be able to support the programs that are going on in this building. So the One Roof Foundation, the Kraken, and Climate Pledge Arena have absolutely no profit motive whatsoever in this project. We're simply doing this as a gift to our community, and we hope that you see it in that spirit. And with that, I want to touch a little bit on the agenda today, because what we're going to do here is I'm going to provide a little bit more context on the equity goals as well, and then we're going to hand it over to our architects. We'll take you through what you've seen here, the program design. We'll touch on our sustainability efforts, and then we'll get to next steps and discussion. But before we do that, I wanted to just provide a little bit of background on our equity prism, if you will. So we've come at this project in terms of looking at how this project can be equitable, not only in the design, but also in the construction and also the programming. So right now, of course, we're just at the design phase. So at the design phase right now, we've had a number of community meetings with a bunch of different groups that we've identified, including the resident organizations, the neighborhoods, tribal groups, veterans groups, and eventually the Seattle Public School students through the SDAT process that is about to start here this summer. We're going to spend 3 different meetings through the course of the summer, meeting with the various school district constituents to understand what their goals and needs and inputs would be for this facility. I will tell you that to date, what we've learned so far, it's actually been very encouraging. People have been very, very supportive. But the one comment that struck us probably most poignantly was from the veterans, who said, make sure that this memorial wall receives the honor that it deserves. And let's not forget that that's an important part of this project. And we will get there someday when we talk more about the landmarks process a little further down the road. But I just want to assure everyone right now that the memorial wall is a very important programmatic element to us as we get into this. And that's where we are right now. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my partner, David Kunzelman from Seattle Center. We've been working very, very closely with them through this entire process, and I'm going to have him share a little bit of his perspective.
All right, thanks, Lance. And on behalf of the city and I'm just so want to say we're super excited to be here with my wardrobe coordinated friends.
I was noticing that.
I already received a text from someone online that has noticed that. I had to say the obvious. But seriously, you know, we are at a place that the city has had tried to achieve, to try to be at this point for a long, long time. And, you know, it was the city that deeded the property to the school district back in the day. And the facility was constructed and has been operating and is largely unchanged now, 77 years later. So, you know, the city has a number of goals in the project, but the obvious one is a reintegration, if you will, back into the fabric of Seattle Center. So programmatically, we have a base of operations that currently happens under the north stands of the current facility. That will be recreated with warehouse, shops space, other shipping and receiving and service functions. But there's a lot of back of the house space that's an important part of the structure that you'll see in the presentation. But perhaps more importantly, from a public perspective, the goal of the project was, of course, to bring down the walls, integrate the project, create the transparency that you're seeing in the image that's before us. And of course, Barb will be speaking to later. And wherever possible, find more opportunities for public space. So certainly take advantage of the amenity and times that the facility will be used for festivals such as Bumper Shoot, but also find more opportunities for the public to enjoy this when it's not being used by our partners at Seattle School District. And with that, Brad, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, gingham shirt number 3 speaks. I'm Brad Tong with SOJ, and we are the owner's rep for the Seattle Public Schools, also often just called the school district. I'm not going to go through the SPS's history of the site since you've seen the video and that was self-explanatory. One thing just to, I think, clarify is that SPS has, since 1947, owned the site and built the stadium. The stadium has been in ownership and operation of SPS since. And when this capital project gets built, should it get built, and we certainly hope so, SPS will retain ownership of the site and the building. So as we all recognize that the project sits on Indigenous land, SPS is committed to stewarding the site into the future. And this is a fantastic project to do that through a lens of equity and inclusion and respect and honor of all those who have come before us. Speaking about the levy funding and the levy approval, just pre-2022, Seattle Public Schools had certainly recognized that this 12,000 seat concrete structure has fallen into disrepair and certainly lost its luster. It put on the levy approximately $66.5 million in 2022 to the voters of Seattle to either renovate or replace this stadium. That levy, it was a special levy, and it was approved at a rate of approximately 80% of the voters of Seattle. The motives for this partnership and for a more ambitious project than the SPS's levy itself. You know, Seattle Public Schools and the city of Seattle partnered long before this developer RFP came out, and we worked very, very much in sync to create this developer request for proposal. In it, SPS's lens indicated that we sought additional capital funding. Why? To enhance, we thought, the commercial and public opportunities and also to better serve students. Obviously, the levy project would always be focused on supporting students and their interests. But how would a third-party developer come into the mix, right? It would be through innovation, through the value and expertise that they bring to augment and strengthen SPS mission and goals, and as well to bring a strong and sustainable operating model. That innovation and that expertise from the private sector was sought through this RFP. This RFP was written to enhance student centering. Again, SPS would always build a project that was student centered, but we clearly sought a developer developer consortium or developer to come to the table with innovation and an attitude towards centering students and to enhance that as a central goal for SPS. Within that, the project would be informed and inspired by student voice throughout. It would promote and strengthen the idea of a student athlete of the future. And if we have time later and you'd like to explore that, I'm more than willing to go into what that more specifically is. But that's about discipline, goals, and achievement-focused learning, teamwork, building strategy, character, resilience and humility, and social, emotional, and physical health building. As well, stronger partnerships with Seattle Center organizations, centering youth programs, opportunities, and really strengthening and tightening what a project could do in terms of collegiate and career professional appearance, design, with more heft, with more resources. Again, a focus on really collegiate and career professional level of quality of a product that likely could only be achieved beyond the $66.5 million levy capital that was approved. I think in sum, this One Roof proposal, when it came in, and as we've worked with the One Roof Stadium Partnership, it is much less, as Lance said, much less a commercial endeavor and much more of a nonprofit model. It is a nonprofit model, and this model really lends its focus to being better suited to being student focused, and that's very much resonant with the SPS partnership. I also think that One Roof's ability to drive and to raise funds from private philanthropy to add to this unique civic project is a real win-win, and it really aligns with SPS values. So from SPS's lens, perspective and lens, this is a really strong and compelling partnership.
So with that, I'm actually going to introduce our architect partners. And so in addition to Barb Swift and our landscape architects and GGLO, or local architects and code consultants for us, we have retained Generator Studio out of Kansas City, and primarily because of their expertise in stadium and sports facility architecture is one of their specialties, and they've designed a number of stadiums that we were very impressed with. That we work with them on a couple of other projects as well. So I'd like to introduce their principal, Tom Probstl, who will start to take you into the project itself. And Tom, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everybody, and hello from Kansas City. Again, my name is Tom Probstl, co-founder of Generator Studio, and with me today on the Kansas City side is John Iams, who is running the show here, and so I will be secretly giving him eyebrow motions to move slides forward. Apologies that we couldn't be there today, but I think that as was evidenced in the video that we started with, the video really speaks for itself and the opportunities that are in front of us. I just wanted to say thank you, and again, a shout out to Barbara Swift at Swift and Company. Without her, and I thought I saw David on there too from GGLO. Hey, there you are. Without GGLO and Swift, we would not be able to do this project. So I wanted to say thank you to them and their local expertise. Generator Studio, as Lance mentioned, is the stadium experts. We've done work in Seattle in the past. But let's focus on this exciting project today and what we have in front of us. So if we could go to the next slide and we can get into that. There was some additional information about community outreach, which was mentioned previously, that we're going to continue to do. And really the key phrase here is a feedback loop. We're going to continue to gain insight and research and further the design with the feedback that we get from not only the stakeholders in this room, but the stakeholders in the community and the students. So it is a complex, intricate feedback loop that as we continue to gather information, and today's presentation is just part of that as we move forward. So with that, I think we'll move on to the next slide and get into some design elements. Lance, I don't know if we want to talk any further about the schedule today, or maybe take a minute to mention that and your ongoing efforts with the school district.
Well, I think it's important just to provide some context as to when we want to get going, which is really as soon as possible. As all of you understand, cost of construction continues to escalate. So there is a sense of urgency. That being said, we also know that there's program happening in that facility today, including sporting events and graduation. So we are trying to time our start dates so that we're as non-disruptive as possible. So the goal is to start right after graduation in 2025. It'll be about a 20-month construction process. So we will continue to work through our design and permitting process over the course of the next year. And the idea of getting started pretty much a year from today will be our goal, and to be open in the spring of 2027. So fairly aggressive by public facility standards, but as a private developer, that's the timeline we're operating on, and we're going to try to hold to that.
Thank you, Lance. So Barb and I are going to carry us through on what set the design, what some of our concerns and goals and so on that set what you're going to see today. And I'll kick it off and talk about some of the major project goals and design principles. And then I'll hand it over to Barbara to pick it up and talk about those sort of outside influences and how they come into the stadium itself. So next slide. I think we've talked about this already and what some of the project issues and opportunities are, but just to clarify and further reinforce that, you know, the expansion and unification of open space, as David mentioned, we've got a huge wall and we want to take that wall down, and it turns out there's space behind that wall that we can take advantage of in many different ways from a multi-use standpoint. It adds public gathering spaces. It allows Seattle Center to do more on the site. It allows the school district to do more on the site. So we'll talk further about that here in a minute. Making those connections, both visual and physical. We'll talk more about that. When we take down the wall, I can assure this esteemed group that there are sight lines and views that we didn't know that could possibly exist, and we're so excited to explore those and see further what those opportunities are. So we're highly aware of that and what happens when the wall comes down. This is a complex partnership, and the programs and needs of all stakeholders, we're aware of that. And as architects, it's our job to bring all that and narrow it down to something that can be built and is affordable for the budget that's at hand. We also need to be aware and be cognizant of fulfilling the Century 21 master plan and vision around the site. And then, of course, you know, the opportunity that this project brings at many different levels in terms of community and the civic gathering space. Next slide. So where do we start? How do we start this process off? And, you know, this site, I'll tell you, in my 30 plus years of stadium development, is one of the most unique sites, if not the most unique site that we've had a chance to work on. And we'll talk about, I think it's self-evident, but we'll talk about what that means and how it impacts the stadium. But, you know, these goals and principles really came from the stakeholders on the development team side and sort of culling many goals and principles down to, of course, we've talked about this as a student-first focus, providing community access and activation, engaging Seattle Center campus, and we'll talk a little more about that on the image that is in front of you. Of course, DEIA and sustainability targets are essential to this. Creating meaningful partnerships. You know, this is an important facility. There are a lot of different partnership opportunities that need to be explored with all the stakeholders, and we'll continue to do that. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we do have a budget that we need to stick to. And ultimately, we need to have a solid performing stadium that helps reduce operating costs and ensures a long-term viability of this facility. The image that's in front of you, how do these goals and principles then start to manifest themselves in the design of this project? And the first thing we noticed on this site, of course, is that all four sides are really different. So as you all know, as much as anybody, each side has this unique character, and it is our job, we believe, to break apart what we typically know as a stadium and reassemble it with four unique sides. So in a lot of ways, this is almost like the pavilions that were built for the Seattle World's Fair, in that they responded uniquely to its particular microclimate. We're doing that here as well. So instead of rebuilding the wall, if you will, we're really decomposing the wall and never really bringing it back. And so what does that mean at the next level? In this image, at the lower left corner, this is where the current memorial wall is. And this is an area of focus that we see on the east side of the stadium, that obviously we are preserving the wall, the memorial wall. We are also using this pavilion to celebrate SPS with a signature flag pavilion that we'll show further here as we get into it. But also, as we look to the future and celebrating SPS, we got to make sure that we honor the past, the present, and the future when we work through this pavilion, the seating, and the programming that goes on the east end of the stadium. The south end of the stadium, as we'll see further, this is Harrison. How do we bring Harrison into the stadium? Is there a way for us to blur the lines between the Harrison that we know today as we walk along there towards Climate Pledge Arena? Do we blur that line with the stadium concourse itself? Do we create more space, multifunctional space for non-event days and event days? The answer is yes. We found ways to do that, and we're excited to talk further about that. Of course, on the west side, International Fountain, we see that, and Barb will talk more about that in a minute. It itself is its own room, and so how do we not break that beautiful room by the work that we're doing on the stadium site? So Barb has carefully explored that and what that means as we transition from International Fountain to one of our entry gates on the west side and into the stadium itself. So we've reacted to that in a different way by providing lawn seating that steps down to the field of play itself. Finally, on the north side of the stadium, this is where a lot of the activation in terms of programming occurs. Back of house, Seattle Center has a tremendous amount of operations that exists on the site that we're consolidating on the lowest level of that of the north side of the building. I do want to point out, though, that on the north side, of course, there's a lot of back house traffic and operations that occurs, particularly with McCaw. We're preserving all of that, so nothing changes in terms of site access with this design process. Everything with McCaw is maintained, and we endeavor and will continue to be a good partner with them and everybody on campus here to make sure that operations can proceed as we know it and be improved, if anything. Next slide then. So taking just a finer lens to this, the image in front of you, we've actually flipped around and we're hovering over the International Fountain, if you will, and then Harrison is to your right side, angling off there to the right side. And so taking one step further, what does this mean as we dig into the stadium itself? And of course, what might seem obvious, but we have to make sure that we maintain this as a world-class stadium for the Seattle youth and for the community itself. This stadium is going to have a lot of those amenities that you'll see in a larger stadium. And what a wonderful opportunity that is. As I started to mention, and Barb will get into here further, this very much is an outside-in design that we link back into the campus itself that Barb will talk about further. Again, providing those community support spaces, creating flexibility for events. And we'll talk about when we take the wall down, all these new opportunities and space that opens up. One example of that is on Harrison. As we blur those lines along that walkway and we improve Harrison, we will even have the opportunity to provide some cover with the roof that we're going to build to cover seating on the south stand. That roof will extend a little bit over Harrison so that on a non-event day, people will have some coverage from rain. And so those are the sorts of opportunities and amenities that we're thinking about that begin to thread into the neighborhood and blur the lines between Seattle Center and the stadium itself. As I mentioned, of course, restoring Memorial Wall and the importance of that. And then, of course, we can't forget about the stadium itself. This does need to be a multifunctional field to support football, soccer, rugby, and other events. And so the field is appropriately scaled to that. And then we have a variety of stadium elements that ring around the field itself that we'll talk about a little later in terms of stadium operations and stadium functionality. I will note that one of the key and signature elements of this that did not exist in the current stadium there today is that we're able to provide a 360-degree concourse walkway around the venue. This is a wonderful way to fully experience the stadium and the neighborhood, connect with downtown. You'll be able to see the skyline. You'll be able to see all these amazing buildings that are around as you walk around this facility. And also you'll be able to look down at all times onto the pitch itself. So this is a wonderful orienting opportunity for everybody so we minimize the opportunity for people to get lost as they walk around. You're able to see both down to the pitch itself of the field and also into the neighborhood itself. You'll always know where you are. That's a really important factor and consideration for us. So that's one of the key things in this stadium. And I think with that, Barb, if you're ready, I'd love to hand the mic over to you and let you start talking about those outside in influences.
Great. So I think there's some statistics as I step back and thought about it. So if somebody can mute there, that'd be great. That I think just merit commenting on because they really influence all kinds of things here. So Seattle Center gets roughly 12 million visitors per year. There are over 30 cultural institutions on site, and there are over 5,000 events. That's heavy lifting for 70-odd acres. That's a big deal. And that doesn't include all of the people who move in and through it and use it as part of their daily life. And what it means to me then is something like this master plan with all of those parties who have vested interest, who love it, who've been using it for decades. This master plan becomes important in terms of mediating between interests and basically guiding the long term. And I think it's important down here, direction and flexibility relative to change. So what we've done is we've pulled out some of the things that seem to really stand out as important as it relates to the stadium. And I've been thinking about this as an onion. So the center of the onion is the stadium, and then there are these layers around it as it goes further out into Seattle Center. But in terms of this, the idea that this is the best gathering place, whether it's 2 or 3 people or thousands of people, is critical. And that means that the way you approach design is essential. expanding that unifying open space, whether it's hard or soft, is essential, and it puts all of the activities and all of the buildings, cultural institutions in a larger context. The notion of free public space is critical. This is one of those places where we all rub shoulders, and having that in terms of civic environment is essential, I think, increasingly. I've mentioned flexibility, attracting partners. That's tied to health, both in terms of diversity of activities and also economic accessibility for all. And you're going to see that in terms of the physical attributes of that, and then sustainability. So why don't we just roll through the next image, which I think this just is an image of all of the stuff that goes on here, right? Let's go to the next image. We zoomed out, sort of look at where this sits within the city. And what's interesting about this, and over the years, people have described Seattle Center as Seattle's living room. But what's interesting is many of these places that are its partners have a unique idiosyncratic characteristic, whether it's the Sculpture Park, Pike Place Market, the Olmsted Volunteer Park, Gasworks. Those are all context responsive design solutions to the Pacific Northwest, which is important. If we go to the next image, we're going to come in a little bit, and I want to talk about the spatial structure of Seattle Center. It sits on the shoulder between Lake Union and the Puget Sound. It's a relatively planar condition, which, given where we live, is unique and something to take advantage of. But it's structured using three major tools in terms of the spatial experience. And that creates, and that is comprised of these legacy trees, many of which that come out of the World's Fair, so 60 years plus. This is big, large structural stuff. And then what you see in the pale blue, the sequence of open spaces that are framed by those trees, and they vary in size. And what's interesting about this, if you come in on Republican or come in through Founders Court, those entries tend to be relatively narrow but comfortable to use. And then when you come into the center with the International Fountain and the South Fountain Lawn, we have this great big expansive space, but again, which feels comfortable when there are one or two people and thousands of people. The next layer that adds to this, and if you can go to the next image would be great, are the buildings. And they are a remarkable collection of idiosyncratic buildings, ranging from the Armory to Climate Pledge. And you can see here, we have the Memorial Stadium right in the center. Those buildings also add to the tree canopy as the tools that create the spatial structure. Let's go to the next image. One of the interesting things, if you think about those statistics, is how all of that service is provided and what the network and web is that supports it. So the pale blue indicates really the existing pedestrian corridor, and over on top of that, in pink, you'll see emergency and service access, which is essential in terms of the functioning of the center. And then the blue is also vehicular access. We're going to dive into a little more detail in and around the stadium. But I do want to note one of the connections which is being added as part of this project is a north-south pedestrian connection on the west side of the parking lot, which will be there in the long term. So that connection north-south will be enhanced. If we go to the next image. So if we zoom in around this, the pink again is along Harrison. That's the emergency service access along there. The pale blue again is pedestrian zone. And I think what's terrific here and remarkable is that you not only get all of the service functions layered on top of the pedestrian zones, and I'm sure that both Jill and David can speak to times it doesn't work well, but as a community member, I think it's remarkable. There are a couple of things which I think are important commenting on. One is the parking lot, which will stay at the Seattle Public School District parking lot. The entry is largely from the south, moving north and exiting out. And then there are a number of entry or exit points, 3 of them along that. On the north side, it's important to note that this is where some really serious heavy lifting in terms of service occurs, and it's double layered. So if you start at the north and come south, there is a large access route that serves McCaw Hall and ultimately goes into a tunnel. So that's semis, et cetera. That's a big deal. We aren't going to be impacting that. And then immediately south of it in the dashed line underneath the stands is a vehicular access, which provides access to all of the maintenance and storage facilities that were discussed. Another critical point, which I want to bring up again, which is tied to this heavy lifting, there is an access route that comes from down below here, which is roughly at about 94, up to somewhere around, I think it's about 103. This is the predominant interior route for Seattle in terms of Seattle Center in terms of their service of the campus. Most of the vehicles are not licensed to go out on the streets. So preserving and protecting this is critical. This also indicates the small pavilion buildings that Tom mentioned. And then we've identified these nodes at these intersections. And what's interesting about those is those are not only places where you have a crossing of movement, but they need to be places where gathering and stopping occurs. Let's go on to the next image. We looked at this from an accessibility perspective tied to topography. And in the paler gray or paler blue, that's all under 2%. The next intense blue is under 4. And then we get into some limited areas in terms of this concept design where there are sloped conditions and a very limited group of stairs and or walls, and walls are designed for seating. So I think if you were to squint your eyes at this, there are very few areas where there are ramped conditions or in the green, what would constitute a barrier. So nice, open, lots of decision points. It's no longer a walled rectangle. Let's go to the next image. I want to step back and talk again about the spatial structure of this. Here you see again the buildings, the canopy of existing trees. One of the things that's going to be contributory to this is the canopies are roughly 30 feet above the existing grade. And if you think about the armory, it's probably 6+ stories, so you get a sense of height and proportion. We're working hard to save existing trees, so those are going to add to that spatial structure. I want to point out one thing here, which I think is important. So these are small pavilion buildings on the 4 corners. And then this dashed line, which really comes all the way around, picks up here around the memorial. That is an open fence. So if you were walking around this today, you would literally be able to see into it and through it potentially. Let's go to the next image. So I'm now going to move into a discussion of the program and the design. And then Tom is going to follow me. And my focus is going to be on the 2 onion layers outside the stadium. So if we can go to the next image. One of the things that I think is important to note is that in the dark dashed line, that is the current limit of the stadium and the wall. And the pale gray indicates where the new stadium will be. So we have a significant increase in usable public open space. And then again, in terms of the extent of the open fence, that is going to be much more transparent in terms of its characteristics. Let's go to the next image. I want to take a moment with this one. We have a series of 3 images that talk about different circumstances in the life of this particular part of Seattle Center. But I want to take a moment and just talk about a couple of things for orientation. We have entries, 1 entry on this end and 2 entries on the east end on both sides of the memorial wall. We have ticketing on the north side on both sides, and then we're going to be developing one on the south side of the memorial wall to sort of address the numbers of people who come to events. I've described the extensive fence. And here you can see in the dashed line the canopies that rise up over the public space. And I think the other thing that you'll notice with this, which I think is important, and it goes back to this issue of how Seattle Center is structured. If you think about it, and if you were to take the International Fountain, it really is defined by the lawn, the fountain, and then there are these alleys of trees that define the edges of it. Those alleys of trees typically include the major circulation, but if you erode those, what you're doing is you're eroding the frame around the International Fountain. In this particular case, you're also potentially eroding the frame around the stadium. So what you'll see is we're consistently wrapping the stadium and building on the existing alignments of trees that we're protecting to keep that, what I'm going to call interstitial space, the transitional space between one and another, so that it all holds together and is cohesive in a unified element. Okay. In terms of day-to-day use, this is really beginning to look at how some of these areas might be used. People gathering in underneath the canopy. There's lots of seating and benches, low walls. There's the development of a potential multi-use court here. And then you'll see down on the south end, we have, the east end, we have the parking lot. And then we have the layers of Harrison starting from the outside with the emergency functions, et cetera, and the pedestrian corridor, a layer of vegetation, which is broken up. So you have multiple ways to go in and out and through, and then up against the fence line. Again, we have another layer of gathering spaces. So let's look at the next image, which is when there's an event at the stadium. I think what's important about this, and we've been studying it, is how queuing occurs and how it doesn't impact all the other things that are going on at Seattle Center. So for example, area for queuing in around ticketing. If you've already ticketed, area for queuing to go through the gates. Again, over here, area to queue adjacent to ticketing, not be standing in the middle of the parking lot, et cetera. So we've been looking at that type of thing. Looking at the use of 2 gates, which would probably be used as egress gates on the south side, and introducing the opportunity for food trucks to pull up alongside. They could serve both sides. So stadium side as well as public side. Let's go to the next image. This is a study, and this is the second in a sequence. And we're going to be going back to Seattle Center and having more conversations, but looking at how to program and insert all of the festival activities that happen. And there's a very high degree of complexity that's required with this. But you can see what we're doing is beginning to locate bands of tents that build on how they use it currently and looking at opportunities, again, for example, along Harrison, where you can have those tents, but you could still have the emergency function. Go to the next image. Okay, I've already done the general orientation. Let's go to the next image. What we're going to do now is we're going to start in the northeast corner. We're going to go clockwise around the site, looking at some enlargements. So let's go ahead and go to the next image, which is going to start in the East District or the parking lot. This again is Seattle Public Schools parking lot. We are maintaining the existing count of parking, which is about 220. What we're doing with it is we're restriping it. We're removing some of the ticketing structures that are in the middle that frankly mess up the organization and efficiency. But beyond that, we're not doing anything with it. You can see though, it really, in terms of views across, you can see the blades as the marker of the entry into Harrison Street. On the north side, you can see that there is a grade change of probably about overall 10 feet. In the center, you can see the memorial, which really is abutting the edge of the parking lot at this particular point. Let's go to the next image. So what you see here is an enlargement that illustrates the approach to the parking lot and restriping. But what we are doing is we are bringing the landscape campus character of Seattle Center out around the memorial, so flanking the two sides of it. So we're bringing that sense of the campus east. And then in some initial thoughts associated with the memorial, really beginning to look at if a sort of a gathering plaza space in front of that memorial would be in support of it and give it more space. Right now, the bumpers are almost into the shrub vegetation. And here you see a very early perspective, looking at ticketing, the queuing along a leaning rail, and then the memorial here in the distance. Go to the next image. So the memorial wall has been landmarked, and we are just beginning our work and our exploration, and we'll be working with the Landmarks Board on this. We have a number of observations. I've mentioned a couple of them, the dominance of the parking lot, which frankly I would say is disrespectful. The water features are non-operational at this point. We're going to be doing some exploration to find out a little bit more about them. There's a lack of access to the memorial, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. And then, as Lance said, the goal of honoring the memorial is essential from the perspective of the veterans. So if you go to the next image, we have some very initial thoughts here. We have to really evaluate the relationship of the memorial wall in relationship to the structure of the stadium. And again, we're really just beginning to dive into that and understand what the implications are. Looking at the notion of a small plaza in front of it that might have seating, whether that is or isn't a good idea, but it's a thought to give some buffer to the memorial itself, because right now it doesn't have that. Looking at the water feature and obviously restoring the stonework. All of this is very initial, and I'm sharing it with you so you're aware of it contextually. And again, we will be working with the Landmarks Board on this. You go to the next image. We're going to roll to the south and go along the South Harrison District. I think there are some things that are really important about this. The extensive canopy of trees and the scale of the buildings really frame that view in, whether it is of Pledge Arena or turning around and looking at the Blades and Mopop. That's really remarkable. Right now, though, it is predominantly a corridor, and the wall of the stadium really makes that incredibly corridor-like. We are working to protect existing trees, predominantly the deciduous trees. The evergreens are really one-sided at this point, so those will be going. This also is a place, and in talking about a place to gather, I fundamentally believe that you can have corridors that also are gathering places. You just have to be smart about how you do it. So let's go to the next image, and that begins to get at this particular point. So again, the emergency function here, we have the armory, we have the Artists at Play playground, a mature alignment of trees on the southern side. And as I mentioned earlier, we're really developing what I'm going to call a permeable gasket between this sort of pedestrian slash vehicular access route for pedestrians to move into a more intimate gathering spaces. And then what we're doing at this end in relationship to the fountain is developing a couple of ways where you can begin to peel off and head more directly toward the fountain. Here's a perspective that's just about midpoint looking toward Climate Pledge Arena, and you can see here in the distance the scale of the armory and then the canopy above, and so you can see how those, coupled with the trees, create a sense of space. This, frankly, is a really lovely place to walk even now, given the character of that canopy of trees almost any time during the year. So I think there are a lot of amenities that are going to make this even better. Let's go to the next image. This takes us around to the Southwest District, which is a really important knuckle, I think. And again, the pedestrian routes come together, but right at those points where they come together are places where people stop They make decisions about how they're going to move forward. And this obviously is dominated in large part by the International Fountain. We want to make sure that's supported. There are the alignments of trees, which, and the frame view, both north and south, as well as west to Climate Pledge Arena. This also is a place where there are layers of activities that occur during festivals. And it is a place that has the investment of, I know it's more than 20 years, maybe 30 years ago, when the redevelopment of the International Fountain, the use of the paving, that special paving, and so we're going to be looking to salvage and reuse that. Let's go to the next image. There are a couple of things which I think are important in this that I want to mention. I've already talked about this condition right here of developing multiple ways in which people can peel off, stop and gather, and or go through to the International Fountain. But here is the entry into the stadium. And you can see it is not axial in its relationship to the International Fountain. It's offset, and that gasket that I talked about between these large open space rooms is there. We believe is important is that in this case, the International Fountain needs to have pride of place, and the stadium entry shouldn't compete with that, and it should also hold its own as a place to gather and move in and through. Here's a perspective looking from approximately right here back in this direction. You can see the Armory and Climate Pledge Arena beyond, and using low seating walls to grapple with the grade change there. We go to the next image. We're going to head to the Northwest District, which really is the terminus of August Wilson Way. And to me, that condition really is the epitome of corridors, which are predominantly for movement, but don't create place yet. So I think that's one of our focuses at this point. Again, the incredible legacy trees that define the intersection there and the axes going north, south, and east, west. There is a covered walkway running north-south, which will be leaving. And then you can see in that image on the right, you can see the wall, which has been there forever. So in the future, you're going to be able to see through that and see into the stadium itself. Here is the access drive down into that service area. Again, this is incredibly valuable, tucked away a bit. And then I think it's fair to say over time, there have been an accretion of things to try and clean up this area or contribute to it. This is an opportunity to kind of really generally clean it up. Let's go to the next image. So again, the service access, the intersection with August Wilson Way and Kroshower Plaza Promenade. A fairly generous and wide walkway coming up here, and we are saving the trees in that corner and pulling back from it. So instead of having a 90-degree condition, we're pulling back to create a space here, here with a series of seating steps so that basically that area can begin to function as a gathering area. Then we have a platform, which is a couple of feet above it. So again, not a lot of physical separation. And it is a kind of a multi-use court at this point. Let's go to the next image. I think at this point, Tom, I need to pass it back to you.
You're doing such a good job. I think you should just carry it now. We do want to take a minute and step inside as well and talk about how all this wonderful work starts to translate inside. But we did want to take a moment and reinforce what turns out is 34,000 square feet of expanded public amenity space that Barb was alluding to as she worked around the venue. So not insignificant. And we're excited about all these unique spaces and gathering locations and flexibility that this is going to provide for all the stakeholders. So it's a significant area. We just wanted to note that. Next slide, we do want to step inside and talk about what this means from a programming standpoint for the stadium itself. And as we've talked in detail about the outside-in approach, we also have to look at this from the inside out. The stadium itself has to perform and meet the needs of Seattle Public Schools and others. And to that end, in this diagram, you'll see that we've got the field itself, the football field, and then the capability to also support soccer and other events. So the pitch and field layout is configured and would meet FIFA requirements, meets our American football requirements, so on and so forth. So it's a multifunctional field. To the east side, so from the pitch over to the existing parking lot, we have, there's a bank of seating there on the east side. Behind that seating is an area that's dedicated to Seattle Public Schools to run their football games and other events, other activities and sporting events. But it's primarily housing 4 large lockers that has an array of toilets and wet areas, if you will, officials, so on and so forth, storage that will happen on that east bar that's tucked away between that seating area. And then on the east side of that bank is, of course, the memorial wall that faces out to the parking lot that Barb talked about. As we move then counterclockwise, you will all be familiar with the Republican access point down and onto the field itself. We're going to maintain that, but enhance it. So we'll make sure that what vehicles that do go on the field have ample room to do so, that they can also turn in to the right as they're coming in off Republican and get down into Seattle Center's working functional space itself. So we have to ensure that all those activities and operations can work seamlessly. As we work our way around to the west then, as I mentioned earlier, we do maintain the full accessibility that goes underneath the McCaw Bridge, if you will, and around over to the western area where at this moment there is a suite of recycling and trash bins and so on that is out in that area that we will maintain. And then also the campus maintenance access up to August Wilson Way is also maintained in that area. So Seattle Center operations, the core of that happens in that north building, and all this is underneath the concourse. So you will not see any of this as you're in the stadium itself, other than perhaps the entryway in from Republican. Republican itself, so as the teams arrive, as they do now in their buses, they will get out in that location and then walk on down into their locker room and then out onto the field. I'd like to head upstairs then and talk about the functionality of the concourse. As I mentioned, this is a 360-degree concourse. You're able to walk all the way around this without turning around. And I'll start at the west side where Barb left off, that is in relation to International Fountain. So this is one of our entries, and your arrival there is off access by design, as Barb mentioned, and you're greeted by the concourse, which then steps down to a bermed grass seating area or turf seating area that then heads down to the field itself. I want to point out that in every seating type that we have, and we have quite a few, which is one of those features that makes us more like a professional venue, if you will, than a high school stadium. But, and that is that in every seating type that we show here, that it is fully accommodated with wheelchair accessible sightline enhanced seating. So if we have an area like this berm seating that holds about 1,000 people, that there is in fact an area for those in a wheelchair and their companions to be in an appropriate place for them to view and enjoy that seating type. So that is consistent with every seating type around the venue. The overall strategy for the stadium facility itself and operations is that in each quadrant we'll have a suite of toilets, family restroom or non-gender, if you will, and concessions that support, if you will, each quadrant of the stadium. So we're well dispersed around the stadium itself. So as we head north out of the berm seating area and the west concourse, you'll see that there is a suite of restrooms and concessions there. Stadium ticketing can occur there, and a few other functions are going to happen in there as well. Then we will head out onto the corner of the stadium. So at the north end of the berm seating, we've got an elevated concourse area that looks down over the field. These are really wonderful areas. There's one in each corner, and we'll see it in the 3D views that we'll get to in a second. But these are really wonderful perched areas that allow guests to look down onto the field. These are also areas that can be used for group gatherings. Some of the bands could set up there and play. We could have a band competition across the field. There's a lot of really fun and amazing things that we look forward to activating in this space. We will then walk across a bridge that then connects us to the North Concourse. The North Concourse is based with 3,000 seats that cascade down to the memorial field itself. Again, with the requisite wheelchair and sightline enhanced seating. And then at the back of that seating is our press box. So our stadium operations for events, security, the coaches, running the scoreboard, those sorts of things happen in that press box. On the other side, then the other side of the concourse is our suite of toilets, concessions, stadium support, and also stadium operations in the light blue, and a band warm-up space. It's really a multifunctional space. That's that large blue area where the band can warm up, and it's also a multifunctional student space. We'll then head around to the eastern side. We'll have a ramp, again, more support, restrooms, concessions. We get to the middle, we've got the seating that cascades down on the east side of the stadium. On the east side of the concourse, then, we've got a really wonderful, what we're proposing right now is a flag pavilion that will celebrate all of Seattle Public Schools. That programming is ongoing with Seattle Public Schools, and more to come on that. The memorial wall, of course, is going to be present, the backside of it, so we need to consider that and its impact to this concourse. Then as we head around to the south side, as I wrap this up, this is the Harrison Street side that we've talked about a lot in blurring those lines. I want to point out that the concourse all along Harrison and also on the International Fountain side is more or less, it follows the grade more or less along those parts. So that is one of the ways that we can blur the lines between what we know today and then this concourse that we're going to add in. So it's a really wonderful gasket, as Barb has been talking about. I want to point out that there's a really unique thing that we'll see here in a second in the rendering on the South Concourse. We're proposing a flexible fence that will allow food trucks to pull up and provide additional food and beverage opportunities, not only for the stadium itself during event times, but also we can flip that so that the food trucks could support any of the Seattle Center activities on non-stadium event days. So really interesting concept that's going to further the flexibility of the stadium itself and the programming for non-event days for Seattle Center and the campus. And I think with that, we'll head over to a couple of the views that showcase this. And as we start to wrap up the presentation here, so this is Harrison Street. Again, we think we'll be successful if we blur the line with this gasket between the actual Harrison that you know today, maintaining the trees that we can, those beautiful mature trees, and then we step in to the concourse itself. At particular events, there'll be food trucks. If you could go back to that for a second, John, if you don't mind. The food trucks, we're showing a couple there, one in blue, right dead center of this view. But I also want to take a second to point out that really one of the signature aspects of this whole stadium are these wonderful canopies. These canopies are multifunctional. They will provide coverage for Summer Harrison, which is wonderful as you head towards a big event at Climate Pledge Arena. And also they're covering seats inward into the stadium itself. Really wonderful, expressive element that's not only functional for the stadium and Harrison itself, but as Barb mentioned, is also a very nice transition from some of this upper canopy and some of the higher buildings that are around. So it's a really nice step down to the field itself. Next slide. We're starting to step back, step out then. We're looking eastward towards the east stand and the beautiful flag pavilion that we're thinking about. Then on either side of that, you'll see an elevated sort of curved element that looks down over the field itself. These are those group sales areas that I mentioned. There's one in each corner of the stadium that provides a ton of flexibility on how you operate the venue. We really love the idea of, that on a Friday night lights football game that one of the team's band is on one side and the other team's band is competing over on the other side. There's a lot of really fun and exciting things that we can do with this. Next slide. And then we step back, of course, and look at this in its overall context and the importance of this and the discussion that we've had today. So that was a lot to talk about. Thank you, Barb. And I think we've got one more slide that is a transition, Lance. I'll ask you to sort of step back in as we, one final thing, of course, sustainability is top of mind in everything we do. And there are a lot of different aspects to this, as you can imagine, with a large project, and everything from strategies to reduce our carbon footprint, using as much recycled content as we can. Of course, as it does today, we'll continue to work on mitigating the heat island effect because we are adding some roofs back. Make sure that we minimize any heat impact there through the use of white roofs and canopies. The stadium systems themselves will be highly efficient, so on and so forth. So this is an ongoing study as we continue to get in and put a finer tooth comb on sustainability and operations. Next slide. So this gets into next steps, and Lance, I guess I'll ask you to help close this, but as we look forward to our next meetings, and again, this feedback loop is the critical part of this as we continue to gain insight and feedback from all stakeholders, including yourselves. So with that, I will hand the mic back over to Lance, I believe, and maybe open it up for questions.
Sure. Sorry, let me say something.
Tom, if you can mute.
There we go. There you go. Yeah, just to put a little context around these. So we are planning to start a conversation with Landmarks towards the end of summer, as Barb mentioned. So we will be getting in front of that group to start to discuss exactly what we should be doing with Memorial Wall. In addition, we're moving forward with all of our MUP and SEPA processes. I do think that the development agreement is the agreement that is going to exist between Seattle Center, One Roof Foundation, and Seattle Public Schools. It is in process right now. Our goal is to get it done by September. We'll hopefully hit that date, but we do not yet have a formal agreement in place. We do have a MOU, if you will, with all the principal terms agreed to, think we all feel really good about where we are, but we do not yet have a final formal agreement. So at this time, One Roof Foundation is in effect funding the early work on this process at risk. And hopefully someday we'll actually get to a formal agreement where we can all start to move forward in a project. So that, I think it's probably time to hand back over for questions.
I've been checking online. I know there are a lot of people who are attending online, but I don't know that there's any members of the public who are attending online. So if you are a member of the public and you are attending online, after commissioner questions, I think we'll just take one more pass before they start with deliberation to make sure that any members of the public who do want to make comment have raised their hand and will have an opportunity for that to occur. So I'll turn it to you.
So you're going to start with questions and we will go around the room, but after the questions, we will go back to our, I'm just going to say now. What we have been doing is kind of doing a round of questions, just this was for common knowledge, and then kind of going back around the room and doing comments and recommendations. And we're changing that format again. So we'll go around the room, get our questions out, and then kind of open up for deliberation and more kind of back and forth format. So that has worked really well for us. So we're going back to that today. So I think it's easy to just go around and if you
That's you, Joe.
I know, that's because I
get so excited.
I got bumped off.
She's got lots to
Let's
say.
go. I'll let you know, Brian.
I knew there was a downside of sitting at the end.
And you know, and because it happened to me last week, you can always just
Pass.
to you, absolutely.
No,
No, he's dying.
yes. Thank you for this. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the discussion. I've always wondered why it was a standalone stadium in the bottom of a hole and putting the concourse around at the city center elevation makes a lot of sense to me and really almost creates a bowl stadium that is entirely public. I love that aspect. I have a couple practical or sort of logistical questions, I guess. A lot of the circulation diagrams reference pedestrian access. It sort of ends at Fifth Avenue or Mercer or wherever. And I would love to understand how we're tying into Sound Transit and sort of large crowds that will have to come from somewhere. I think parking is definitely an issue with the stadium currently. People walk from a distance. I think that lens of where are people coming from a little bit further away would be something that I'd love to see. That will really impact how we look at it because we're not necessarily looking at the stadium, but we're looking at the impacts of the surrounding areas and what does it do to public grounds, right? So we know Sound Transit is coming. Yes, it is 10-ish years away, but hopefully that is thought of in the design of a future stadium. And then another question I guess I have is, this seems to be going to be under construction right during FIFA World Cup, and City Center is going to be one of the main hubs of public gathering. How do we phase construction, make sure that construction minimizes its impact on the sort of the public facing aspect of Seattle in the World Cup with lots of outdoor activities, screens and such that are going to be happening at the city center. So not a question about your stadium in itself, but about it's going to be a construction site right when we have 700,000 people here.
So should I?
I think it's just back.
Yeah, so let me take the construction question first, and then I'll touch on the transit for a moment. So on the construction side, so we will be a self-contained construction site that will fence, and once we get demolition done in the summer of 20, 5, which is well in advance of World Cup. Well, actually, by the time World Cup comes around in 26, we will obviously be contained within our fence line and be building in the hole, if you will, and some of the structure. But all of our access to that construction site will be coming off of Republican, off that back corner, on the northeast corner of the project, so away from campus. So I think that we will be able to set up our construction in a way that really should not be impacting what's happening at the fountain and or the rest of the gathering places on the campus. We're going to start having those conversations with Seattle Center here shortly about construction impacts. But your point's a very good one, and we will work very carefully to, not just for World Cup, but basically the entire time that we're working, that Seattle Center does not feel us in any real material way other than a little bit of noise, perhaps during demolition and some things like that.
And Lance, if I could mention, I think at Seattle Center, we also see it as an opportunity. It's going to have this construction edge, and as mentioned, we have an approach that keeps our pedestrian access separate from our construction access, but we have this canvas all the way around of what otherwise could be a construction fence. And how do we work with Selin, our construction partner, who are kind of excited about this idea, to make this an instructive and interactive element, since it is going to be so dominant, and not just the World Cup, but Bumper Shoot and Folk Life and Bite of Seattle, et cetera. So we're not anywhere close in where that's going, other than it's an opportunity for us.
In terms of the transportation, and Kevin knows that right now the monorail is a really key component to the campus, and it's one right now that is basically serving as our connection to Sound Transit currently. And so Climate Pledge Arena relies very heavily on that monorail connection for all of its events. We're moving between 3,000 and 5,000 fans a night through that corridor, if you will, of the monorail. So we're actually fairly excited that the monorail will continue to operate and be consistently, have a nice, actually for the first time now, we'll have a west entrance off of the stadium where people can get off the monorail, come across that corridor and enter into that gate, and it'll actually be a much closer connection to the stadium, whereas currently they would have to come all the way around to the east side to the current entrance. So in some ways, the access to transit has improved significantly just under the principal designs before we ever get into what I'll call the future Sound Transit routing that's coming our way. So
I'm glad you said monorail. I was wondering why the southwest corner wasn't more activated in that. But yeah, if you have a plan, that's great.
I'll further just add to your to answer the question about impacts, and certainly the students who play there
are impacted as well.
Are impacted, and SPS is working very, very hard and very heavily on alternative plans for the intro for all of those students who are working there. So we, as well, SPS alone, not these guys, but SPS and my team is in parallel.
How many football seasons are going to be missed?
2. Okay. 1 graduation, 2 football seasons.
Yeah.
And soccer.
Great. Thank you for your presentation and your work. I had just a couple of questions. You touched on it a bit, but could you say more about your work on the parking lot and kind of what is taking place there? I heard removing some ticketing structures, maybe making a plaza near the memorial. Was there anything else occurring in this project in the parking area?
Yeah, no, and so I actually was almost going to jump in when Barbara was going through her presentation. I'll be really clear here. The parking lot is not part of the development site. This development site is currently existing on the existing Memorial Stadium site. We will have a development agreement parcel there, so we are not going to be considering the parking lot to be part of our project development. That being said, we are going to engage in a couple of what I'll call minor improvements to it in terms of removing those 2 kiosks that currently sit in the middle of the parking lot. We'll be taking those down. And the primary reason for that is just to allow for restriping, because right now the striping follows those kiosks kind of being in the way. It creates a pretty inefficient way of striping it. So we'll take those down and we'll restripe it. The area that we're gaining in front of the memorial wall potentially for for that is actually part of the development site that we will have. So yeah, I guess in short, the parking lot will be something that we're going to leave as a Seattle Public Schools parcel developed.
That's why you're not using it for construction as well.
Yes.
Yes, your comment about.
Well, and Seattle Public Schools hopes to keep it open for utilization for parking through this process as well. So it's a pretty important revenue source, but also parking facility for the campus.
Great. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. And it's exciting to think about this stadium. As you mentioned, there's so many features to the Seattle Center that are so distinctive. And so this becoming kind of more of that conversation as compared to sort of a pit behind a wall that for people who don't participate in footballs or graduations, maybe don't have as much of that access to. So it's great to open that up more. I wanted to ask some questions about, you mentioned, you know, a lot of community input, and I was curious about how that informed the programming. I'm curious about the programming kind of from the northwest to southwest corner of the site. You mentioned the Northwest Plaza, the multi-use plaza, and the multi-use courts, but I wasn't really quite sure what that meant. Like, what kind of courts are they? How will people be using them? What are they doing? And how did community conversations inform some of that direction?
So I'm going to hand this to David and let David comment, because it's that very much is a work in progress right now. Of course, the architecture is early because we're trying to create something to react to, but the programmatic conversations are still very much in their infancy. So
yeah, I think that's fair. This is absolutely ongoing. In the early conversations, community conversations, it's really been focused on, you know, how do we have this multifunctional space that can really benefit Seattle Center when there isn't an event going on, and how can we impact Seattle Center when there isn't something going on there? And that's conceptually where we're headed on the west, and it's a place that will be able to be set up when there's a big event going in the stadium that will be able to add more space, add more opportunity and connection when there is an event. And think about that more along booths or tents or outdoor elements and things like that. So be able to connect inward and have that. When the stadium is not in use, it's a place also along those programmatic lines where it can be programmed for festivals and events and things like that. And you know, that's about bringing utilities and working with the arrangement of a hardscape and our event team thinking about how that can be best arranged. And then, you know, a place that we haven't gotten into detail yet is then what does that look like in a more passive way when those uses aren't in place, and then how does that expand opportunities on the campus, either for smaller groups or gathering or individuals and things like that. So really, to answer your question, we have a ways to go. You know, as we're able to produce imagery or ideas, then we can, you know, work with some of our outreach events to be able to get more input there. But it, you know, it has to do a lot. It's going to be interesting because it has to do a lot. It serves a lot of masters. And I know the Seattle Center team is very interested in how it can be doing all this sort of multifunctional.
Right.
Can I just add that from SPS's perspective, SPS does really look forward to the integration of sort of non-binary use of students, families, as part of the civic realm as well. So that's why the strength of this partnership and being led by those who know civic programming is going to be really important as a win-win for SPS as well.
Great. Two more questions and connected to SPS. You mentioned that there were kind of enhanced youth opportunities through art and activation and technology. And I was curious if you could tell me a little bit more, since it's an athletic field that's being redesigned. So I'm curious to kind of hear a little bit more about some of those other cultural aspects that you touched on briefly.
Sure. I could speak about this for days, but I think that at its core, SBS leadership are looking at this today, using it today as an educational facility. It's not just sports play. The students are learning how to build their skills through athletics today. Tomorrow, school district hopes to enhance what this learning facility is doing today by opening up so many more opportunities for career readiness, career opportunities, internships, greater opportunities with the dozens of resident organizations, and with the walls down, more permeability, greater access. I think the attractiveness of this facility to those resident organizations is going to be so much greater to offer student programming themselves, like internships and direct career path opportunities. Learning on the job, students helping to run operations when that makes sense is something that we're definitely talking to one about. So I hope that answered.
Yeah, great, thanks. And then one last question about permeability, but from a material perspective, you mentioned the open fence. What is that materially going to be? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where we are right now is in some conversations with Seattle Public Schools. And what we are beginning to look at is a metal fence, which is not climbable, is not chain link. And I think if I were to point you in a direction, it's similar to the fencing system that is around the Gates Foundation, which has fairly intense security issues. We are going to be having a working session in July with the folks who do security, the school district, and with Seattle Center and Seattle Police Department to really look at this, not only in security questions, not only in terms of physical manifestations, but operational. There's some very interesting dynamics about that in terms of student groups. There's
Thanks.
Just to tag on to that, what's the height of the fence?
We haven't identified it yet. I gotta congratulate you. You identified really good questions and areas that we're like.
All right. So you mentioned a little bit about, to Brian's question, the monorail arrival, potential for light rail arrival. Please excuse me if you answered this one, but primary bus arrival expectations for the site.
So the routing, I actually probably, the D line is all the way over on First Avenue, I believe. Jill, you may probably know this by heart. Currently, right now, I think Seattle Center served, the bus line is on the very, very west side of campus.
Yeah, I think we have strong bus lines on each side of campus, and right on the west side of Climate Pledge, we have a number of lines that serve the campus on that side. The east side's interesting. We have the E lines and other lines like 62 and 5, big line that carry a lot of people that are coming down Aurora and stopping on the new 7th Avenue as the rest of the traffic goes down into the tunnel. That is the location for the new Salem Transit head house. And so there was some discussion of that moving closer. But it is on Harrison, which is important. And Harrison obviously is an important path for us as described into this facility. And so right now there's an important hub with buses and pedestrians there. And if you ever want to come on a Kraken evening and see the number of pedestrians coming on that route from Harrison, it's pretty impressive. Also picks up some of the parking opportunities that are along there. But I think though, that's really, right now, that's where it is. But as you know, it's a very permeable campus, and we have a lot of people that are working their way southward from Queen Anne. We have a lot of people that are working their way from Belltown, and there are some bus lines over along Denny and others that are working their way into campus that way.
Great, thank you. And then in terms of pickup and drop off, is that also distributed on each side, or is there a primary side of Seattle?
It is distributed very adjacent to this project. There is a major one that happens along Harrison. So there is a drive lane that comes in and serves the school district parking lot to the north, and then has Mopop to the south. And so there is a opportunity there for it come in and turn around and drop off. So that's a key one in this location. On the northeast corner, where Republican and 4th Avenue exist, there's a little L shape that goes around the former KCTS building. That's a real workhorse, not only for access into a bunch of back of house things, but it serves a lot of buses and drop off that happen for events at the stadium.
Great, thank you. Next question, are there particular identified art opportunities?
So I'll keep going. As part of the city contribution, we have of course, a 1% for art contribution associated with that. It is early in that, other than we are committed to doing that, but in concert with the signing of the development agreement, we'll be working with arts and culture to look at opportunities there. I would say that the piece that at least at a high level, what we're planning is this is city money, and we want the art to be located in a part of the project that has access all the time. So I anticipate that in those zones that you saw with the expanded Harrison Street or the expanded West Side will be those primary opportunities for the art.
Great, and you're already connecting with the Office of Arts and Culture.
Just that they know that it's coming, yes.
Okay, and then just one slight question. It looked like a true design build, not progressive design build. Is that correct?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part of it.
It looked like from the structure of your work and timing of construction that it's a true design build process, not a progressive design build process. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Great, thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, I got some quickies. Lance, you said that you guys are the developer, but I see you also listed as the operator. So is that a role that's going to be defined in the development agreement, that you're going to operate this?
It is. So we are negotiating right now in the development agreement an operating plan. We've been asked actually to operate. We were hoping someone else would step up, but we looked around and there was nobody else raising their hand. So we are going to take on the operations in conjunction with our partners. We sort of divvied this up where Seattle Center is going to be providing some security, and of course, Seattle Public Schools will actually be managing their events, high school events, and things like that. But we will be the operator for a period of time until such time as we either find someone else or it stands on its own and someone else can take it. So yes, we will be doing both.
Is there a pro forma showing the number of event dates? As you develop that?
Yes, there's an early pro forma right now that we're running. And I just want to be really clear too, that any and all revenue generated from that is basically going to be put right back into the operating management. So there's no management fee whatsoever, not anything being taken from that. But yes, we are working on a pro forma because we're trying to figure out how this thing will pay for itself. Because as Tom mentioned in his presentation, when we say sustainability, it's not just environmental sustainability, it's economic sustainability, right? And the last thing either of our partners want is a pretty new toy that we can't pay for. So we've been working very hard on sponsorship. We're looking at partners that can provide corporate sponsorship support. We're also looking at ways to generate enough revenue to be able to manage this, and not only just manage it, but actually generate enough revenue that we can actually give money back for access.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
if I can, I'll just add that, that element of operation was in the RFP, and with much conversation, our partners have agreed to, in fact, operate it for this initial 5-year period. And, it was just important. You can look at the current facility now, and we wanted some ongoing opportunity for an operation that could provide some funding for maintenance and ongoing capital to pay for itself. Basically, that is the goal here. And having a professional operator that we have in this team is really going to be phenomenal. We don't know what that structure will look like afterwards, and we're certainly going to be exploring different nonprofit approaches, whether One Roof chooses to continue or we adjust. In addition to the development agreement that was mentioned, which is an agreement that would be between, we have some complicated agreements, as you would know, and the development agreement is between the city and One Roof, and how this will work. And we have an interlocal agreement between the school district and the city, and there is an operating agreement to come. And so we're working on those elements, as Lance has mentioned now.
Some of my questions are also kind of trying to set up what we want to see the next time you come. And so that's why I'm asking about the pro forma. And before you guys came in, there was discussion about trying to understand how many events this 100 and some million adds. And I know that that's not the point, but I think for us to understand access and the open space, if you could share what your thoughts about what just in a range of how many commercial activities you think this brings. How many, we talked about Ballard FC, is the rain coming? Is it Seawolves, right? Was that the other one?
Yeah.
So I think that would be great
Sure.
in the future.
And I think I can offer some preview of what we've found to date, which is, first of all, the rain. I think right now this facility would be too small for the rain. We did look at it initially as whether this could potentially host,
They're already too big for you.
but they are looking for more seating than this currently provides, and the infrastructure just couldn't ultimately support that level of stadium size. But we are not viewing this as what I'll call a music forward facility. That's why you didn't really hear much of that other than bands and things like that. We do not look at this as a concert venue. That doesn't mean that a show won't be able to come in, and maybe 2 or 3 times, in addition to the festivals, 2 or 3 times a year, someone may decide to bring in their own infrastructure, sound equipment. Of course, they would be able to do that. But in talking to our partners and really looking at what it does for the cost impacts, because when you do build a music venue, it gets substantially much more expensive in terms of rigging, power loads, all those sorts of things. It just seemed like something that for us was not the right direction. So we will have concerts. We would be happy to have them, but it's not a music forward venue in the sense that if people are thinking that we're building a concert venue, that's not our intention.
So I understand the development agreement, it's not that. But in the nature of the agreement, is it such that the $40 million of city money is meant to cover the public amenities and the public open spaces, or is it all commingled? Given that that's going to be our interest going forward, I mean, it's a great courtesy for you to show us the stadium, great, the wall, the parking lot, but it's the public spaces that we're going to want to be talking to you about. And I was just wondering if there was a correlation between the public spaces and the $40 million.
So the answer is the funding is commingled, but as part of the development agreement, there are some primary interests that the city has to, if you will, where that money is going. Just like the school district had a budget based on an original refresh to some degree of the existing facility had they gone alone. But absolutely, we look for our money, if you will, to be able to cover some of the transparency, the public spaces, the back of the house spaces, the moving our shops onto campus and in with that warehouse.
That's all in getting out of 5.5 and stuff is all in.
Yes, that is the plan.
Okay, then my next question is about outreach. And you talked about having done some and doing some more. I think that would be a great thing to add to the schedule. And we have seen some pretty sophisticated outreach programs, plans for public projects recently. So if you could just talk about, or maybe we do this next time, are you going to have an outreach consultant? What is the approach to outreach? You talked about this being indigenous land. Are you doing indigenous outreach? Beyond the route of the usual suspects of the resident organizations and the built-in students that you have, parents, what's how you're challenging yourself in regards to doing fantastic outreach?
So the school district has brought a consultant on already in terms of, now I'm sorry, the names.
Pyramid
Pyramid Communications has been brought on as a consultant in that area. We have our own internal team of community folks who are very skilled at this. And so that's early on, that's what we've been using to set up the conversations and meetings with the resident organizations, with the community members, to have the two charrettes that we've had to date to get input. In addition, we have had direct outreach to the veteran groups and to the tribal groups. It's really the student component at this point that's been missing, and that's just simply a nature of the timing. And we now have a framework in place to start that. But I mean, to the extent that anyone feels that we're falling short on that, we'd love to get that input and determine how best to continue to get that feedback, because we're always open to suggestion on this stuff. It's you know, we don't have all the answers. And
we can bring some more detail at the next, in the next section of sort of what that looks, looking forward, what that looks like as well.
We're also seeing it really the art outreach and the project artist selections and things being an important link with outreach as well. So perhaps when we get into the, really glad to brought up the $4 million for the 1% and getting that started. So I think as that goes forward, that probably bring some of this. Okay, so here's the tricky part. Those are things to see next as we look forward. But one of the challenges we have is typically at the concept level, people bring alternatives. Things aren't baked yet. And I know that with your RFP process, that's always the challenge, is that when people are responding to an RFP, they've had to do a certain amount of design. And I completely understand that with regard to the stadium, which again isn't necessarily our purview anyway. But I'm a little surprised that there aren't alternatives about the open space around, because I wouldn't have thought that that had to be so baked at this level for you to get to your agreements. And so I'm wondering, and I've been in your position having to fit this process into an RFP process. And they don't necessarily go all that well. But as I look at the master plan and look at especially the west side and somewhat the south, I don't have any heartburn about the south or the other, or the north, or the, I totally understand there. But the west side, I see phrases like, protect the, respect the fountain, but what about expand the fountain area? Where is the look, the alternative that says, let's look at this not from how all this West turf can just serve the stadium, but what if we had a look of how it could be this one generational chance to actually expand the international fountain, which is the heart of the center, and has always been constrained. Talk about the one thing that's been constrained by that wall. It's that open space. And Barbara, I'm not sure that that edge and those trees and all that have to be so sacredly held. This would be the chance to grow it. Because if you're ever there on a busy festival, it's too small. So I'm wondering if there's a way in your process that would allow us, with regard to that, to take, while you move forward on others, take a step back and have some conversation and dialogue, like often happens at a concept level, about that side in particular. I have a ton of things. You talked about the Northwest and the Southwest, blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to get into them. It's more like the process of, is there a way that we can get into them in a different, at a different time? That's my question.
So let me answer the first part of your question from a practical standpoint, and I'll hand to Barb. I would say, Jill, probably the primary reason why you're seeing a little bit more development here than you're accustomed to seeing at this stage is really our fault, in the sense that because we're going at risk on this project, we've really been trying to focus on getting some cost certainty as to what this project would cost, because ultimately, if we have to sign up for the price tag of this, I can't have an open-ended design process out the back end. So we've been pushing our partners to say, we really need to land on something that we can price and understand scope. So that's really been kind of what I would say a primary driver of what you're seeing. Now, that being said, again, there's no pride of authorship here, in the sense that if there's a better idea for that connection, we're happy to look at it. It's just, for us, it's just ultimately being able to get our arms around what the cost impacts are and get it priced and really understand the constructability of it. So that's the tension that we would face, is the timing of pricing, costing and thing. But I just want to be really clear from One Roof standpoint. I can't speak for my partners next to me. We're fairly agnostic about what happens to that edge condition. You know, that's not really our place. So,
but even if it means taking down that walkway canopy thing and incorporating this space into the main lawn.
You know, I just,
Who knows?
Did I stop the recording?
so,
Yes, Brian. Maybe, Brian.
thank you, Lance. That was great. The western side is the one, there's always places in the project where when you begin, you're gonna be back at it. It's gonna bug you in the middle of the night. It's gonna itch.
It's this one.
This is it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Jill, stepping back with that piece and just doing studies of potential, given the constraint of budget. Now, I say that because what that means is probably not bigger pavilions, right?
Right.
But I see a real opportunity here, which is with some further discussion with Seattle Center about programmatically how that might be used, coupled with thinking about spatially what that's doing. I can see a number of options coming out of that. And it might give us some more flex.
It's the one area that's owed that work, I think.
Yeah. I'd be honest and say it's been bugging me down.
You know, on the south, until David is ready to look at the 10-foot pile of debris that's under Artists at Play and how to erode that and pull that back a little, you've done a great job on your side of the street. And it's like issuing a challenge to Seattle Center. Now you guys figure out, and that could easily be a future project. I mean, that's what's great about this, is these little breadcrumbs you leave for the future. But the West, I think, needs to be done now.
Thank you.
So for me,
Sure. I just have one question, but I want to sort of probe a little bit more on the questions that Brian and Holly asked about transit access. So I worked on Climate Pledge Arena. I was actually the SDOT lead on that for a couple of years, primarily on the MUP and the EIS. And the broader transportation issues were like the issue. I mean, it was the biggest issue for the Uptown neighborhood. There was obviously a a lot of transportation improvements made in the area, the bike lane improvements, transit lane improvements. And a really important part of the MUP was the broader transportation management plan, which is like ongoing. Like, how are we gonna get 18,000 people here, 150, 200 days? So this is a smaller facility, obviously, but I guess my question is, is there going to be a broader transportation management operations plan of some kind moving forward? I think that's really what I'm sort of wondering, because I didn't hear.
Yeah, well, the
really
one
much
thing
about
that
it.
I think we we were actually reducing capacity of this stadium substantially. So currently 12,000 and we're taking it down to 8,000. So while we hope to maybe get more people coming because it's nicer and newer and what have you, at the end of the day, we're actually reducing not only the footprint, but we're reducing the capacity of the stadium. So we're sort of, in theory, reducing an existing condition. That would be my first comment about it. The next, I guess I'm going to have to defer to our outside lawyers at some point as to what that requirement might look like in terms of a TMP, if to the extent it's required.
Yeah, I think probably what I mentioned, the CBOOK process would want to understand is the capacity versus going back to Jill's question, the number of days is being used.
Mhm.
Like that's the math, right?
Yeah.
How many people are coming here over the course of a year, before and after, right? So I think that is going to have to be factored in to the environmental analysis of the MUP, because that's what's going to lead to the. I mean, I think Lance, you're absolutely right. I mean, the monorail access here is great. I mean, that's already been improved. You could rely on some of the improvements that have already been made as part of the Climate Pledge Arena that more happen on the west side. But I think this is more of a comment than a question.
Yeah.
But I think that the broader transportation, it's just going to have to be something.
From a Seattle Center perspective, as from a campus perspective, we're certainly very excited about all the work that was done at Climate Pledge and what continues to grow monorail with arrivals of people using public transportation to the campus for Climate Pledge events. And now having this team here, and I think that's like 25% or something like that is what I'm understanding now. And so we're excited with this partner to bring that same methodology. And, in that one, it's about, your ticket is also your ticket on public transportation. So how can we use some of those same strategies, different audiences for different events at this location? But, certainly if Rob Johnson were sitting here, he would be talking about opportunities here. And I think we'll
asking Rob a lot of questions.
And we'll certainly be working closely with the team to do that, because that's obviously important to the campus as well. And we love that people are trained for whatever venue they're coming, and then they repeat that same behavior to coming to other events on campus.
Just one other quick question I want to follow up. Thank you for that. Is as part of the transportation management plan for the arena, the on-street parking prices were changed dramatically on the west side of the arena in the neighborhood as a way to, frankly, try to reduce people driving to arena events. Has there been any broader discussion with SDOT about anything like that over here on this?
Not yet, Kevin. No.
Okay, thank you.
Can you, thank you, by the way. I'm very excited. I love that this is a nonprofit. What a nice, lovely gift to the city. So thank you for that. Very excited to see this. And then, as a side note, my son is graduating there tonight, so I'll be going there. This over. I guess I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the memorial wall and what the veterans, or what, your outreach to the veterans, and what is important about the wall, and that, not that, I understand its importance, that's not what I mean, but is it the wall itself that is critical, the actual wall, or is it the idea of the wall? Because I think, Barbara, you mentioned it, it seems like a really inappropriate place to put a memorial wall on the backside of this lovely new development that it seems like there would be a much better way of celebrating that sacrifice. I'm not a veteran myself, but.
Ben, I would go back to, so my boss, Todd Lewicki, actually was the one who probably shined the purpose on this initially, and that was when he was standing there one day before an event, and a woman walked up to him and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm looking at this memorial wall." And she looked at him and said, "I've been coming here for years and I've never noticed it." And he said, "Excuse me?" She said, "I've been walking by this place for years and I never noticed this wall." And so Todd took the time to explain to her what it represented and sort of explained it all to her. And she was very touched by that. But more importantly, my boss was touched by it because he was embarrassed, because it says right on it, lest we forget. And we forgot. It seems to have been overlooked over the time, and you know, obviously now the fountains don't work, and there's shrubbery in front of it, and there's a parking lot that's been put up to the front of it, where the bumpers are, you know, 4 feet from a sidewalk, which then leads to the. So I think that the general approach that we've taken is that we've done it a disservice, and we need to restore it to the glory that it probably had in when it was first created. And I think we can do that. But in terms of the veteran outreach so far, it really has been the fact that these young men lost their lives in World War II and should be remembered is really what we're focusing on. So there's a lot of nobility in this, and we're actually very excited about it because it shouldn't be that difficult. That's the thing, is it's not a heavy lift here to restore this back to what it once was. It's not like we have to rebuild it. We just have to restore it to its, and again, with landmarks, of course, we're going to be very interested in hearing what they have to say. But for us, I think it's going to be I really look forward to the opportunity to do something fantastic there.
You may have heard the story, but when we doing the outreach for the master plan, a woman came up to us and said she was the one who won the high school competition to design it. And could tell us the whole story about how that was advertised, and so it's still quite a very big deal for her, and she's probably still alive.
You know, we identified her earlier today, and
Did you?
yeah,
So you can go look for her? Yeah.
Marianne.
That's her first name. I can't remember her last name.
yeah, so
Marianne Hanson, yeah.
Marianne Hanson.
That's right.
I'll also say, just adding to what Len's, how he responded, but the outreach to date, and inclusionary discussions throughout the landmarking process and all the way till today, the veterans are the ones that we speak to are very happy about the landmark designation of the memorial, and it's really, really important to them. They are seem to be very much in partnership with this project. So we plan to continue.
Yeah, we, Jackie and Brad and I were all, have been to Ballard to speak to the veterans there in that group, and they have been particularly connected to the landmarks process, but also are very focused on what is next. And we don't have the answer yet, but just to say that there's a very strong connection there, and they are very much will be engaged as we start to work with landmarks on some proposal on what that really starts to look like and feel like.
Okay, thank you. The other, maybe, you mentioned that the stadium isn't in our purview, which I might have missed that note. But I would still be, this is like an iconic, amazing location for architecture. You have the Space Needle, you have the Glass Museum, Pebbles. I mean, this part of the town is really important. I think the fountain. And so I guess I would wonder if you had a slide that most identified or captured the conceptual sort of thinking behind this. I understand that you're opening it up to the park and making it a lot more transparent, and I don't know if you have it now, or I would be very interested in that, because I think it is going to be a very important, and I understand the design build process and that risk. I totally get cost and everything. And I'm not saying it has to be expensive, but it'd be really great to have a really powerful concept. I love what happened at Key Arena. I think it's what an amazing, keeping the roof and creating a new place there. I guess I would be really curious about, are you trying to capture any of the old architecture? Probably not. But what is the overall concept of the build work? I'm actually going to throw this question to Tom and let Tom provide you some of his best thinking in terms of what we can try to capture in the design.
If I can interject, we have 20 minutes left.
And that could be, if you have it now, but that would be what I would want to see next time if you don't have it now.
We do have it. It was at the very front. John, if maybe you could slide back to that. It's the dark renderings. Yeah. So we had a discussion early on in this presentation, maybe go to the one before. And we talked about, what were the guiding principles that really led to the foundational design for the stadium itself. Typically, if you think of, let's use Lumen Field as an example, which I worked on a long time ago when I was a much younger man. It's in a lot of ways like a UFO that's set down on the site. And there is a range of constraints that often lead to that: security, and a range of issues, back of house things that, or back of house operations that no public wants to see, and often there's a drive to sort of keep the doors closed on a stadium. When it's open, you can go in, but more often than not, a stadium is not used and the doors are closed and you can't enter the space. And so the guiding principles for us on this site and what led to this design is really quite the opposite. When you think of or how we typically approach a stadium design, and we really looked at this from the outside in, and we let the outside impact this. So it's somewhat counterintuitive from a sort of ego standpoint for an architect to approach a design in that way. But we think that that's the right solution. This is the sort of project that needs to set aside egos. When we talk about, some of the things that we're talking about here, DIA and sustainability targets and all those things, everybody's got to set aside their ego and talk about the greater good. And we think that a solution that is open, as you mentioned, you saw that, but that approach, I think, is the right approach versus perhaps a different sort of design, or a design that says, hey, shouts and says, look at me, look at me. I think there's been some excitement about a different sort of approach. And that approach being really represented in this diagram, where we take a stadium and we break it apart into 4 distinct sides. Each one of those sides brings on a character of its own that's reflective of what's around it in that immediate environment. That may not be exactly the answer you're looking for, but I believe strongly that is a significant departure from how stadiums are typically designed, and I think it's one that's important that we should consider. Did that partially answer your question, or?
I don't think so. I think then what you're saying, then I guess I would like to understand if that's what you're saying, that each side has its own expression or architecture. I think that's what you're saying. Then what is that? What does it mean for the open stadium to extend to the park? What does it mean for the respective pound open for the stadium? What are those? Are they all the same? Because I think you're saying they're not all the same. So I guess I would like to understand what that means.
I can take one of those because I think on the south side, it's the roof canopy structure is going to be incredibly prominent on the way it's signed up, and yeah, it's basically going to have a sort of a rounded edges, and it's going to be very architectural. It's not going to look like a stadium roof. It's going to look like a canopy that's got a lot of architectural feel to it. So the fact, and then it's going to have translucent panels on the south side of it, of course, to allow light through for the vegetation that's going to be growing underneath it. So at least on that side, I can comment on saying that to me, the signature element of that is, and it's going to be a massive roof structure. I'm not exactly sure how much square footage we've got right now currently under, but it's a very, very large canopy. And so that to me is the anchoring element on the south side.
I think like what we're looking for is just like what that means. So, you know, this is a diagram that speaks to principles and ideas, but it doesn't reflect what the actual architecture is. So that's why I'd like to see kind of how those manifest themselves in either diagrammatic or kind of architectural kind of. But I will listen to this discussion. Amy, thank you very much. I'm really excited about this. And one other comment, and I'm sure you guys are on it because you have a local, I think you guys said GGLO is on it, but your timeline looks very aggressive for permitting. Last year, if you can get it done. So,
Have you met Lance Lowe?
Yeah. Okay.
He's right here today left, but yes, we did it.
They told me that on Climate Pledge Arena too.
We did it.
So we managed to.
The practice is
Your comment.
That's it.
And again, I'm not seeing any members of the public who wanted to make comments, so I think you're free to dive in briskly into a 15-minute one.
Yeah,
We can go a little bit over, that's okay, 5 minutes over, that's okay. Very good.
Sure. That's what we're always doing about it. Bringing it up. And I think, you know, so.
I'm always so optimistic when we start a meeting. I said,
Yeah. Like, that's not happening, yeah.
the boundless optimism on my part.
Well, it's time for my questions, and I actually don't, I think a lot of my fellow commissioners have kind of addressed the majority of my questions, and so I can kind of flip those over to comments and kind of pieces of recommendations. And I think what we've just been discussing here, and, you know, I kind of formatted in the beginning to say we would do a deliberation, and I'm not so sure. I think we've already started to set forward pieces that we'd like to see next time, kind of a set of recommendations and requests and things that we believe will help forward this project to the next stages. Because again, I think we're all super appreciative of it. It's very exciting. And there's just some pieces that we really want to get more into. I will start. So I think I had kind of made a set of discussion topics. But I think what I'll do is I'll kind of step forward what I started hearing as recommendations for next time, and then let's have a back and forth and just kind of add on to that. I think would be the best. So, you know, I'll start with where I was sitting. For sure, the west side is one of, you know, the west and the south, there's that interstitial space that is created by the old wall. You know, it's like you can kind of picture that orange blob, right? It's that old wall and where that new wall is, and what happens in there is like where the rubber meets the road, and how the Seattle Center campus is really going to benefit from this amazing new kind of erosion. I'm so excited by like eroding this wall and the non-ego approach to the stadium. So really starting to understand that. Again, I think we all, believe the south side will continue to evolve, but it's really working well. The parallel relationship of the 360 Concourse and Harrison is awesome, you know, and I think, you know, as you evolve the fence design, like that will be something we want to see for sure, the materiality and that kind of, you know, right now it looks like glass and it's not going to be, so what that relationship is. But the west side is really where we, you know, Barb totally understand that it's giving you heartburn because there's so many ways you could peel that onion. I think you've talked about it's the onion and the concentric peels. And what Jill and I have been talking about is a little bit what the converse would be, you know, if you developed, if the center of your onion is the fountain, and what are those concentric rings, and where does that Venn diagram overlap, you know, where those two onions meet is that public realm, and the grade is a huge challenge, right? So what our recommendation there, sorry, I'm just like going on. But, you know, what we do really want to see in subcommittee, that's part of this recommendation now, is to look at and give you time and space to have that process on the west side. And let those iterations happen, and thinking about data center involvement, understand the programmatic uses. Kate touched that. Outreach, really starting to understand how that space can really benefit the Seattle Center. Right now, it feels like it's kind of focused towards the stadium. How can that invert, or what is the right approach? And maybe it is correct now. Okay, that was the big one. Pro forma, Jill set us up for that. We would like to see just how the events work. It would be great to be able to visualize how that is laid out and how that kind of goes back into the management and maintenance plan. The memorial wall, I think we've all are appreciative of your approach and thinking on that thus far, and are really excited to see how you continue to elevate and restore and honor that space. And really, I grew up in Seattle. I went to Memorial Stadium as a high school student, and I call it Memorial Stadium, that's it. So like, how can we in the modern day start to bring memorialization and respect to history and humanity back into our everyday life? I think would be amazing. So just
I'd like to add to that.
Yeah, please do.
Because I would just like to explore, or at least present the opportunity to explore that may not be the correct location for the memorial wall. And then again, I would totally defer particularly to the veterans, designer, and history, but it just seems that that's not the right place for that to be in my mind. But again, it's just more of would like to know what the other opportunities might be, or if there is any. It just doesn't seem like kind of at the back end of the service side of the building facing the parking lot is where it really was.
Something to add to you about the memorial. I don't know if it's an appropriate time.
Absolutely, because I just started kind of summarizing it, and I was listing the things that we knew so far. Please do.
Okay. To add to that, since it is landmarked, I know it's always a challenge with memorials to restore them or to go beyond restoration. But because we do have this challenge where all of us just know of this location as the memorial, but we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I think there is an argument for some layer of additional interpretation and storytelling at this site that wouldn't necessarily have to be at much of an additional budget line, but that I think would behoove the site in that. Sometimes respect isn't just about filling in holes in concrete, you know what I mean? I think there needs to be an additional layer of storytelling that may connect to doing a little more conversation with veteran groups about what that may look like. And then just one last note in that, looking at your site plan, it appears that you have some kind of added in pathways to the north and south of that wall. Maybe those are some areas where that additional storytelling could take place. Just something to think about, because it does seem that is the area that you are touching. You're not doing anything with the parking lot. So it seems like maybe there's an extension there that could take place.
Or maybe there's a different storytelling piece. I like that a lot too, especially if it's landmarked and you can't move it, you can't do anything with it. But maybe there's an additional part of it that makes you understand the story of this, I think, 762 people. Yeah, so like, for instance, I never knew that, and I didn't know that wall existed, and so it's not, I don't spend a lot of time there.
Yeah, so we've already started preliminary conversations about the backside of the wall, which is in the halo, but is not technically, obviously, currently it's part of the football stadium. Of an interpretive opportunity, talking to the students and others, we want to figure, but there's a giant messaging forum there for us to explore exactly that is how do we build upon what's happening here, and so you guys are right on it. That's great.
Particularly with World War II memorials, it's in the era that they were produced. Everyone knows what it's for, but then generations later, sometimes there needs to be additional layers of interpretation around it.
And names have been added for subsequent wars, but I don't remember how far up they go. I know the Korean War, student So that would be interesting to
Mhm.
know that, how that affects your outreach. Again, even though it's sort of a landmark thing.
Well, but I don't know that, I'm just chiming in, I don't know that they have to be at odds with each other.
No,
And I think, you know, obviously there's a respect for the landmark process, but you can add to it and not degrade the thing that made it the
Mhm.
land.
I don't think it's absolute binary.
No, I don't think it is.
And that becomes an interesting conversation for more contemporary generations of high school graduates to be connected toward Afghanistan, where wars that their family members might be more connected to as well.
So, and let me just go back to when I said about the subcommittee about, or just kind of continuing the conversation on the west side. Did anybody want to add anything into that piece too? Because I didn't mean to keep on rolling, so please do.
Yeah, I think, this, I think relates to the west and the south side, and Brian and I were talking about it, I heard a few other folks talk about it. But Barb, you were talking about the paving, and kind of relating to the paving, but I think there was a part of your presentation that I didn't see, which is generally, how does this place fit in with the Seattle Center? I think there's a lot of, when Ben was pointing this out as well, wonderful design vocabularies and styles and periods happening in the Seattle Center. There's on the west side, there is a kind of current structure. If I understood your plan right, you're making another kind of covered structure on the south side. And so I'd be curious, as you add design elements, you know, beyond the paving, overhead structures, seat walls, et cetera, how does this interact with the design language of the Seattle Center? Is it distinct from it? Is it blend in and you don't even notice that it's its own element? So I would like to hear more when you come back about the design approach here and how each of these elements fits with or does not fit with the existing vocabulary of its context.
Yeah, I don't think it's about ego either. It's not, we're not asking for the new Space Needle Stadium or anything. It's just what is the character and tectonics, but then it's the character of the architecture.
Which is that's totally appropriate for the next stage.
Yeah.
Right, or at the initial concept.
So, I'm sorry, I think as part of that, as we're talking about adding things to a subcommittee, sightline studies.
Yeah.
As well as looking at the west, but understanding when the spacing comes into view, as you're walking down some of those. Because they did a great job of saying it's not just physical, but it's also visual, so we should make sure that we touch on both.
That was exactly what you were gonna say. On the exact same page, and to add to that, also, you very clearly described the bus arrival, thinking about bike arrival as something we want to do, and pick up and drop off. So I know that you have that knowledge in your mind, so alongside these diagrams, those arrival diagrams would be really valuable.
I'm going forward, just having a couple pages of just transportation, all modes. It's probably what you're really looking for.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is that a subcommittee or?
No,
I think that's just.
That's just general
Yeah.
presentations.
Yeah.
That's useful background documentation.
There's one comment I wanted to make about the west side. I know you already touched on that,
I
but
didn't mean to.
okay.
Please go back.
I'll make it quick, but I just wanted to mention, I think the word that I heard being repeated the most in this presentation, or one of them, was permeability. And thinking about that for that west side in discussion of dissolving the wall at that area, that is occurring, but we still have kind of that buffer that still is being introduced right now with, we just have a lot of broken up programming, it appears, in this location. And so just one note in terms of going back to what you're talking about, those overlapping onions, like how does permeability play into this location in particular? And in those visualizations, making it clear to us what those relationships are, so we can really enhance that.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, what we're talking about for that subcommittee is like really kind of walking that back, that whole edge, pretty far back to really even just like bubble diagrams of what those relationships are and what that overlap is, and then how the grades and the program work within there. Because I think I agree right now, it's the program kind of sits in those bubbles, and not clear how it benefits the Seattle Center versus the stadium, and they kind of actually start to feel like they're in the way almost. So yeah, how it's really creating a piece of space.
And we're sort of leaving vestiges or lingering remnants of some of these very old bad ideas, like that wall has a planting parallel, that has a oddly covered walkway parallel, and to strip the wall back and to blend that surface, we should
Entertain it.
I think you already said that some of the pine trees that are single faced are not useful to a dual sided location, right? Like it would be really funny to have a one-sided, same with a regular tree, like that was planted in a straight line that was meant to be next to a wall. The wall's gone. Let's think about it all. This is a generational building. We need to do plantings that will be really good in 20 years from now. Let's do that. Yeah, it's all the interfaces. I think we're very interested in the interfaces. The stadium looks amazing. Let's soften the edges between the city center and your stadium, and not leave any of the very rigid square that it used to be.
So then in terms of things going forward, outreach and art, and just integrate, you got that right?
Yeah.
Transportation.
I was gonna say so we have kind of the subcommittee component, which
Which is
is
one issue.
Is one issue, and then that please, we'd love to see next time our sightline studies also kind of overlap with that subcommittee. Looking at kind of the transportation network on a larger grain, and those pickup and drop offs and where those stops are, looking at having a better understanding of the Performa, and then outreach, where you have been, where you plan to go, kind of understand that outreach plan, and then, that exciting component of how you bring in different types of artists into the 1%. Solution.
One thing I wanted to add to that too, because there are some great precedents of how beyond the 1% there can be design enhancements in relationship to private funded projects as well. And so I'm wondering if there are opportunities. You mentioned the construction fencing that's going to be up for a couple of years. There's plenty of great examples of artist-led construction fencing projects that have lots of collaboration with community groups. So I'm just like to encourage you as well to think of, we also have the permanent fence. So maybe there are also some material treatments that are happening on the site that an artist could be involved with as well, that isn't necessarily funded by the Percent for Art, but that doesn't also necessarily extend your budget by a large amount. That is a great way to leverage a sense of, character to the site.
I know we keep saying subcommittees, but just to clarify what that means, and I think you may all know this, but we have a pattern of holding subcommittees before you come back to a full commission meeting. And I think you've gotten that list. Let's unpack these things so we can have a focus review. It's not a quorum meeting. It's really an idea to work with some of the commissioners who are particularly knowledgeable or interested in it. So when you come back, you've been able to pick away at that and then how that frames your next full meeting.
So, Michael, what is the subcommittee that will be looking at the west side? What is there a name for that committee, or is it just an ad hoc group of folks?
Call the west side subcommittee.
Yeah.
No, but it's really, it's already
Dual onion subcommittee.
the dual onions. I think
West Side Story.
function.
There it is.
Where does the identity and function of Seattle Center go in?
No. I understand the mission. I guess I'm trying to understand
Who is
the
it?
design commissions. Yeah, do you guys have fixed committees that focus on certain pieces, or you'll put together a group of
It's
people?
really a function of whatever the meeting is, and I think you know who some of those representatives will be.
Yeah, I think we should. It's definitely an anchor.
But they're topical, so we want to make sure that the commissioners who are interested and knowledgeable and focused.
Okay. So does that mean any of the commissioners who are on any ad hoc committees to address all these numbers of topics all together or one by one?
It really, we'll try to make them as topical.
One by one or groups? maybe?
Group,
But we only have one subcommittee that.
yeah, it's really about the
So
way.
there's a point in time.
Oh, so
I'm supposed to ask them if they have any questions of us. While Phoebe gets her, what we're gonna vote on. So, Brian, got any questions of us?
Sorry.
You're good, you're done.
No.
In answer to your question, I believe what we're proposing is a simple subcommittee on the west side. And
Yes.
all of these other things, suggestions about when you come next. These are the pieces that we would expect you to add as you go from concept to schematic to.
These are really larger programmatic questions, but this one focus on the west side is worthy of
Okay.
Sorry for you.
I'm gonna apologize. I have to leave. And
Yeah.
it's not because of.
that. No,
where
I
you were
know you're
going,
running.
it just- I think it was- Yeah.
Good password, but yes, and exit.
Okay, so what we were learning, so thank you again. Sorry for the back and forth, but I think we have got a lot of good conversation out.
Yeah.
Yes.
And notice for the record, Brian's hand is leaving,
Yeah.
is raised as he's.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to vote on approving this initial concept, move forward to next steps with the recommendation to come to a subcommittee for the west side only, and the rest of the recommendations that you have in the format. Or up to you are simply for what we'd love to see next time at the formal, full meeting.
I vote yes.
Thank you for comments. Thank you so much.
Very grateful for this coming together, very excited for it, very enthusiastic, yes, so thank you.
It's a great project, vote yes.
My turn? Yeah.
Yes.
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 All right.
Did you vote?
I did.
Okay.
Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you very much.
And what we'll do is have a little specificity in that. We tried to change also the way that we record minutes. And so we'll just have a list of these items that we want to hear about, not only at a subcommittee, but as you come back in terms of the full. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks to all of you.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Kansas City.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
These guys did that new soccer thing, that new women's soccer.
Yes,
thing. I've driven by, I haven't been in, I hear it's pretty
it,
bad.
it is fabulous. We did a tour of it.
Did you?
And, it is a great project to study relative to this from a materials perspective. So
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when they were talking, is